Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and tonight I'll be reviewing for you Yooka-Replaylee for the Switch 2. Normally when I review remakes and remasters, I start with the list of changes made in case you're wondering if you should pick up the new version if you already have the original. In this case, Yooka-Replaylee is more like a complete reimagining of Yooka-Laylee, which itself was meant to be a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. So the list of changes is pretty exhaustive, and it's possible I will miss half of them in this section because I haven't played Yooka-Laylee in a while, and so I don't necessarily remember how different this version is, but I have done my best to compile as many sources as possible, as well as, actually playing the game and recalling what I do remember. So without further ado, the first and foremost is that the level design has been completely overhauled so that it keeps the same basic worlds and overall vibe, but everything is redesigned so that it's more compact. There's new challenges, new routes. Yooka and Laylee's moveset has been revamped so that it controls better. There are some new moves in there, and as a little bit of a bonus, in the original you had to unlock your moves gradually, just like you did in Banjo-Kazooie. But now, you learn them as soon as you finish the tutorial level, which is great for lessening the amount of backtracking you need to do, because pretty much all of the collectibles can now be collected on one go of a world. The only ones I can think of where you might have to return later are the passive abilities that you can buy, where you can suction in nearby coins or quills by just spinning your tail or going near them, but apart from that, that makes the 100% completion process much more streamlined. The graphics have been significantly enhanced. The original Yooka-Laylee came out on the Switch, and the power of the Switch 2 allows for everything to be so much brighter. The lighting is vastly improved. Laylee now has fur. I didn't know bats had fur, but I guess I learned something new. And it feels like what Banjo-Kazooie would have looked like had it been released in 2025. I especially love when I'm in grassy areas, how you can see every leaf on the tree and every blade of grass on the ground, and even in handheld mode, this is an absolute spectacle. Of course, the trade-off on Switch 2 is that you're only playing this at 30 frames per second. Honestly, I didn't even notice my entire playthrough. And Playtonic is the type of studio that really listens to their fans. Heck, this game's entire existence was a result of listening to fan feedback. And they have said that they're working on implementing a performance mode so that you can play at 60 frames. Although usually in games, performance mode means that the graphics will suffer, so I am very grateful that I had a chance to play this 30 frames per second game if it meant that it could look this gorgeous. There's a new type of currency called coins, or quids as they're officially called. I never quite figured out what the quid stands for. And the quills are still there, but now they've been put in new locations and they're now color-coded for each world. And so they essentially act like the purple coins in Super Mario Odyssey, where each specific world has its own color of quill and you can buy stuff specific to each world. Now, Trouser and Vendy, which were the previous people that you would buy things from in the original, have been given a bit of a makeover. Trouser no longer sells you maneuvers except for a few passive ones, like if you spin your tail, the coins will get drawn in, but your regular abilities like being able to hover, use the sonar, make a bubble to walk underwater, all that is given to you instantly. What he does instead is that you can buy stuff like heart upgrades, energy upgrades, exclusive costumes that are only in that world, some extra coins, and again, all of his goods are tied to the quills in that world. So if you want extra health in World 1, you gotta get the quills in World 1, but then there's also an extra heart in World 2, and so on. And I really like how it encourages you to get to know the world specifically, as opposed to Vendy's stuff, which is available pretty much anywhere. Now with Vendy, in the original game, she would sell you tonics that would either make the game easier or harder, or in some cases put on new graphical filters, or give the enemies googly eyes, etc. They were basically like mods, but officially. And she's back, but now she uses the coins that you collect, and I'm honestly shocked that the coins weren't in the original game, because they feel like they were meant to be there all along. You can still purchase tonics. As far as I'm aware, there's a few new tonics, although I wasn't particularly paying attention to the ones in the original game. And some of these ones are really cool for offsetting the difficulty options, because old platformers can have a certain learning curve to them. I should know from watching my friends try to stream Banjo-Kazooie if they're not used to it. And certain features that were common back then were completely removed in this remaster. For example, when Yooka and Laylee swim underwater, they no longer have an air gauge. They can swim as long as they want. Whereas in the original, as well as the platformers that inspired it, the characters did have limited breaths. You can buy a tonic to bring back the air gauge so that you actually do have to limit how much time you can spend underwater. Or you can make it so that you don't get any penalty when you die. You can make it so that enemies only take one hit to defeat, or they take more hits to defeat. And this mixing and matching of difficulty options is so amazing, in addition to the fact that this game has an options menu. It's not quite as robust as some other games I've reviewed, like the Life is Strange games, but it is nice to be able to turn off the music, the sound effects, the voices, choose the strength of your rumble, and even swap out which button is the jump button, which came out halfway through the game's release day, which is nice that Playtonic, even on day one, is still listening to fan feedback. You can also purchase cosmetics for Yooka and Laylee, which is completely new to this remaster. My particular favorite set is the one that lets you dress up as Shovel Knight. Unfortunately, when you dress up in a complete set of something, you can't mix and match with other clothing parts. So if you really like that Shovel Knight armor, you can't put on gloves, even though Laylee's hands are bare. Sorry, Yooka's hands are bare. Sometimes I get them mixed up. But there are plenty of really cool options, and the descriptions are so cheeky and perfectly fit the Banjo-Kazooie humor we've all grown to love. As mentioned earlier, the controls have received a bit of tuning so that some of the returning moves control better than they did. There are some new maneuvers, and the camera controls have especially been touched up. In the original, that was one of my biggest problems with the game, is that it seemed like I was always fighting the camera, which is saying a lot, because Banjo-Kazooie, by Nintendo 64 standards, had actually a pretty good camera. And now it feels like it's up to snuff with more modern platformers that blend 3D and 2D. I wouldn't say there's any section in this game that makes it completely side-scrolling, but there are certain sections where the fixed camera really helps out a lot with depth perception and being able to focus on the action rather than trying to micromanage attacking and jumping and moving the camera. Those boss battles are now significantly more manageable as a result. That World 1 boss was an absolute nightmare in the original, and he's still pretty tough, but at least now I feel like I only got slightly frustrated, as opposed to rage quitting the game, which, yes, I never finished Yooka-Laylee because it was that frustrating. There are now fast travel points, as well as a map and a checklist so that you can keep track of what you've already gathered. If you pay the markers that are shaped like bookmarks, those are your fast travel points, they can even reveal the locations of other pages, which are this game's stand-ins for jiggies. The story has also been rearranged with new sequences. The opening is completely different than the original. The tutorial has been completely redone. The ending is a bit different, which creates some implications for the future of this franchise. And the game just feels a lot funnier. Like, the original game broke the fourth wall quite a lot, but it just seems like this one goes above and beyond to be even funnier. The soundtrack has also been completely rearranged as well. The original was done by Grant Kirkhope, David Wise, and one other guy that I don't remember, but David Wise and Grant Kirkhope were responsible for the Donkey Kong Country and Banjo-Kazooie games. So their music is put on quite the high pedestal by most of the gaming community. Now, as far as I'm aware, they didn't compose any new songs for this remaster, but Playtonic did hire the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra to completely remaster all of the songs using a full symphony, and it sounds absolutely glorious. It's also really easy to pick out which songs Grant Kirkhope composed because it sounds like, oh yeah, this does kind of feel like Banjo-Kazooie music, whereas David Wise's stuff feels more like it came out of the Donkey Kong Country games, and so it's really great that their distinct styles have carried over. This also means that during the boss battles, they feel a lot more intense because you have a full orchestra making it sound like a fight in a movie. Now there is a tonic to let you switch over to the original music, which the original music wasn't that bad, it just wasn't symphonic. I personally haven't tested this because I like symphonic music. That's my favorite genre of music, actually, and this game is just an absolute treat to the ears all the way through. The progression system has also changed a little bit. In the original game, just like in Banjo-Kazooie, you would need a certain amount of collectibles to open the worlds. In this game's case, it was pages. You still need pages to progress through Hivory Towers, which is the overworld, but now instead of unlocking the worlds, they just unlock specific doors, kind of like how the note doors worked in Banjo-Kazooie. The game does not explain this very well, though, because it'll tell you go through this next door, but it will not tell you to go to the next world. So as a result, I completely skipped World 4. I remembered that it existed because I remembered it from the original Yooka-Laylee. I just must not have been paying attention to my surroundings, which is pretty rare coming from me, that I just completely skipped over it, and by the time I realized, oh, I only explored 4 worlds, there are 5 altogether, I was 3 pages away from beating the game, and so as a result, I said, guess what guys, I unintentionally sequence broke the game. Another gimmick that the original introduced was the ability to expand the world. You'd start out with a smaller version of it, then once you grabbed enough pages, you would make the world bigger. This time around, you don't need to do that. The worlds are full-sized, but not overly big like they were in the original. They feel compact. They feel like as if Banjo-Tooie's vastness was combined with Banjo-Kazooie's compactness, so that they feel much larger, but at the same time they don't feel like they're wasting space. Like just about every inch of the level feels like there's something to it, either combat or a fun area to traverse or an NPC, and once you start filling in your map, it really feels like, dang, they really packed a lot into these levels. And I really appreciate how previously frustrating game now feels like it's so modern that you wonder, could this have been an original game if people didn't know that it was a remake? There's also a character that got a bit of an overhaul as well. There was a guy named Rextro who helped you play these arcade games, and apparently they were so hated that they just completely scrapped all of them and replaced them with new minigames. I won't spoil these new minigames just in case you want to be surprised, but I do agree, these new games are quite a lot less frustrating. Those are all the major changes that I can think of, and again, I'm probably missing so much more. So since I've never reviewed the original Yooka-Laylee, let's start by talking about what's the game actually like. Well, for those of you that haven't played Banjo-Kazooie, which this was a spiritual successor to, this is a 3D collect-a-thon platformer where the goal is to explore non-linear worlds and collect the main collectibles, the pages, in any order you want. You play as a chameleon named Yooka and a bat named Laylee, which in Banjo-Kazooie you controlled a bear and a bird, and these two work just as well together as Banjo and Kazooie did. I cannot believe I'm saying this, because it felt like the Nintendo 64 controller was tailor-made to Banjo and Kazooie's moveset. And these two feel just as natural to control and take advantage of their relative species to provide some cool new moves, such as Yooka being able to use his tongue as a grappling hook, or Laylee being able to use her bat sonar to reveal invisible platforms. Admittedly, it took a little bit of getting used to be able to use their moves properly, as when the game launched, the game wouldn't let you jump with the B button, it forced you to jump with A, so it felt weird having Y be the attack button. Thankfully, on the exact same day that I was complaining about this, the game crashed, but then right after the crash, there was a patch made, and when I rebooted the game, the options menu changed so that you could map the jump button to the B button and the slurp to the A button. And that felt so natural after playing New Super Mario Bros. For so many years, where I had the run button be Y and the jump button be B, and so it really helped me regain the muscle memory that I had been used to for so long. So I would also imagine that the other crashes I experienced probably are patched out, because I didn't experience any since that patch. So again, that was a day one patch that came out after the game was already released, and it just speaks to the amount of respect that Playtonic has for the fanbase. And that's a general sentiment that I got throughout this whole game, is that, again, I didn't really like the original Yooka-Laylee. I thought that it was trying to be a Banjo clone, but failing miserably because the controls were so awful. And considering that the original game was on the Nintendo 64, you would think it would be the other way around. Yooka-Replaylee feels like it's a long-lost Banjo-Tooie, the way that Yooka-Laylee was supposed to be, but at the same time having just enough modern touches so that someone like me, who is hit or miss when it comes to video games, can enjoy himself. For example, you can make it so that when you die, there's no penalty. You know how in some games like Super Mario Odyssey and Donkey Kong Bonanza you might lose some currency, or in some games you have lives. You can purchase a tonic so that you don't lose any currency when you die, which is great for someone like me who really likes the cosmetics and who really likes the tonics. I actually surprisingly really like the quills being color-coded, because it's nice to be able to feel like I have world-specific progression. Not to mention that there really weren't too many challenges that I disliked. That first boss is still a bit annoying, but it took me far less tries to beat him this time around than it did in the second game. And as far as I could tell, the rest of the bosses were great. The final boss has quite the difficulty spike, which is to be expected, because the final boss in Banjo-Kazooie did the exact same thing, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The music was absolutely glorious, and I just loved how the final boss just kept pulling out more and more tricks as the battle went on, and at first I kept thinking, oh, this is impossible, but then pattern recognition happened, and I ended up feeling like I just had a really good test. Not quite as much as how Banjo-Kazooie did it, but still very nice. I guess if I had to pick out a tiny little nitpick about this game, it's that if you leave one world because you feel like exploring another to get pages, a lot of the pages and the quills reappear, but sometimes the game doesn't make it obvious that what you're doing is simply restarting a challenge. So for example, you might see a switch, and when you first hit the switch and complete it, you get a pagey. But if you hit the switch again, the pagey might not immediately be within view, so then you end up redoing a challenge just to get a transparent pagey. I feel like the reason that was done was for players who didn't want to start a whole new save file to redo a lot of the challenges in the levels. And for that, that's pretty cool, but for someone like me, who felt like doing things out of order, it did feel a bit cumbersome. But I do appreciate how, just like Banjo-Kazooie, that game only had one jiggy that required you to backtrack, and I felt like, as far as I could tell, that was the case with this game too. There was one particular challenge where I had to collect a bunch of coins in a row, and it wasn't until I got the magnet twirl that I was able to beat it. But apart from that, you're able to 100% complete these worlds on your first try, which is really great. They're all really gorgeous. The draw distance is alright, maybe not as good as something like Breath of the Wild, but it is nice to be able to get up on a high perch and be able to see things from relatively far away. It's gorgeous, the music is great, the combat is it's there, but it really pulls its weight once you get to the final battle, which makes it all worth it. Now, as far as the price, for once I'm actually not going to complain about one of these games. If you're getting the digital version, which currently is the only way to play it because the physical version is coming out in December, it normally costs $30, which I think that is a really reasonable price for a game like this. But if you already have Yooka-Laylee, then you can get it for $21. And since I had a gift card saved up, I only had to pay a little over $8 for this game. And I felt like that was an absolute steal. So I went ahead, I took the plunge, I bought it, and I had a blast. The game shouldn't take you that long to beat. You only need 120 pages to challenge the final boss. As far as I'm aware, there really isn't a super involved post-game, but at the same time, the more pages you collect, the more tonics you unlock, so that could potentially be a post-game in and of itself. I think that if you like 3D platformers that emphasize picking up everything in sight, with characters that give a lot of cheeky fourth wall and British humor, then you're in for an absolute treat. Now, do I like this better than Banjo-Kazooie? I'm probably going to have to wait until my recency bias goes away to answer that. But I will say that I think there are some modern enhancements that do make this way more convenient to play than Banjo-Kazooie, such as not having to worry about running out of air, such as removing lives so that you don't get any game overs, and the camera being fully analog. Stuff like that makes it way more enjoyable to play. The worlds, Banjo-Kazooie has 9 worlds as opposed to this game's 5. So I might have to say Banjo-Kazooie slightly wins out in the worlds department, but there are some categories where it gets pretty darn close. But overall, I don't think that you should skip out on this if that kind of game was your thing. It may not quite be Banjo 3, but it's the closest thing we can get from some of the original developers, which means that unlike people who are trying to be a copycat, these are the original guys trying to say, we did it once, we'll do it again. And I think they absolutely succeeded. So with that, thank you very much for watching, my friends. Let me know if you have any questions, and what's your experience with Yooka-Laylee and Banjo-Kazooie? I would love to hear if I'm not the only person in the universe that loves the bear and the bird. Let me know down in the comments, and until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!